Very good morning to you all. And first of all, I'd like to extremely thankful to the kindest word by the Professor Dr. Mohammed Youssef. And thank you very much indeed for your kindest word. And I also would like to thank you very much for my friends and colleagues and the students here. And in particular, my special thanks go to my friend in IPRI, headed by Dr. Siti. And I'm extremely happy to be back in Malaysia and to be back in UNITEN again after the 2 years, more than 2 years interval caused by COVID-19 pandemic. I can recall that my last visit to Malaysia was February 2020, just before the outbreak of the pandemic. And I was always enjoying the experience here in Malaysia to have a discussion with the people in the energy stakeholders, in the academia and the government people and the industry people. And I would like to continue and enhance this very important relationship. Today, I'd like to explain my views on what is happening now in the world of energy. As that pointed out, before the Ukraine crisis, the global energy debate was dominated by carbon neutrality or decarbonization issue. Of course, it is still important. It is important as a very long-term strategy and long-term goal for our survival. But nowadays, energy security or stable energy supply is coming back as a kind of paramount. Why? Simply because of the serious impact of the Ukraine crisis. But today I would like to explain, even before the crisis, we continue to see that the rising energy price and energy cost, which affect our civic life and our economy and industry. First, I'd like to draw your attention that in particular after 2020, we continue to see the very dramatic global energy landscape. Firstly, we were shocked by the unprecedented impact of COVID on energy market. In 2020, we saw that significant decline in all energy prices, crude oil price, gas price, LNG price, electricity price, all energy prices saw the bottom, historical bottom. But after that, things going to change. And 2020 was the historic year that we started to see that the wave of carbon neutrality in many countries. Actually, as far as I know, more than 150 countries in the world already announced its own version of carbon neutrality sometime in the midst of this century, 2020 or 2050, 2060, 2070. But many countries is actually targeting to the carbon neutrality, which is really challenging. But at the same time, since the last half of this year, we saw that the simultaneous energy price increase, and which was accelerated by the geopolitical issue like Ukraine crisis. Under the circumstance, our energy future became very, very unpredictable and very uncertain. And I'd like to mention and draw your attention again, Ukraine crisis is very important, but even before the Ukraine crisis became very serious, there was a big issue of rising energy price and cost, in particular after the second half of last year. Crude oil prices, I said, topped $100 early this year, but last October, the crude oil price already became over $80, which became a serious economic issue in many major economies in the world. United States, Europe, Japan, China, India, many major consumers started to say high oil prices started to give a big damage to our economy. But not only oil prices, European gas prices, Asian spot LNG price all became extremely high. And also, and very importantly, coal prices, which is relatively competitive, relatively low as compared to the oil and gas, started to soar in the second half of last year, which I'll come back later. And again, these fuel price increase resulted in the high electricity price, which also has a serious negative implication of our life and economy. Why this simultaneous energy price hike happened? I think there are 4 major reasons. One is a rebound from Corona. As I mentioned, that during 2020, in the middle of 2020, all the energy prices, including electricity prices, saw the historic low. And there is a rebound from the bottom to the top or to the peak. And as the sayings of trading showed, lower the bottom, higher the peak. And the next question, why the peak became so high? The question goes to one of the answers that the reduced surplus supply capacity. Surplus supply capacity is very, very important tools to address the sudden increase in demand or sudden and unexpected decline in supply. But why surplus capacity was reduced in our energy market? Because of the side effect of the energy market liberalization and others. In the competitive market, market players need to be competitive by slashing surplus, by reducing the cost. Surplus capacity sometimes goes to the additional cost to the market player. In the last 10, 20, 30 years, market player was under the continued pressure to streamline their operation to reduce cost, which resulted in the reduction in surplus capacity. And also, we need to be careful about another side effect of the effort to decarbonize the system. For example, when we continue to see the rise in electricity prices happened in Japan, happened in Europe, happened in some states in the United States, one common issue is the trigger was caused by unoperational of VRE. Solar PV or wind power became unoperational, and which became the trigger of the higher electricity cost. But again, one very important issue is this operation of RE is accompanied by the reduced surplus capacity. Even if VRE production became unoperational, if there is an ample surplus capacity it was available, there will be no problem. For example, if solar PV shut down, if gas-fired power generation is operational, there is no problem. But again, the combination of the side effect of decarbonization effort together with reduced surplus capacity became a very serious issue. So under the circumstance, there was a kind of chain reaction and there's no loophole. What does that mean? If the market is tight for oil and gas, but very soft in coal market, we can rely on coal to save the situation. But this time, all the energy source became very high. So we cannot find out a kind of solution by using that energy which is very low priced or market is very soft. And finally, on these issues, on top of these issues, the Ukraine crisis and the geopolitics of energy played out to accelerate the energy price increase in the world. And this chart illustrates that crude oil price, WTI, futures price in the traded in the NYMEX. As you can see, in April 2020, the WTI prices showed a minus category. Actually, in one day, minus $37 was the traded prices. This is a very extreme event and extreme phenomenon. But the bottom line is that COVID-19 creates an enormous oversupply that caused the minus prices. But again, that minus prices created the market reaction. In particular, that OPEC price started to respond. Since May 2020, the coordinated production cut by OPEC Plus resulted in the gradual recovery of oil prices, and oil price continued to rise up to $80 in October last year, as I mentioned. And since then, the oil price increase became the matter of world economy. Major consuming country, in particular United States, EU, Japan, continued to complain about high oil prices and continued to ask OPEC Plus group to increase supply. I will come back later about the response from OPEC Plus. But actually, oil price continued to rise again and topped $100 after the invasion into Ukraine started February this year. And March this year, the oil prices recorded a historical high after the Lehman shock or the global financial crisis in 2008 at around $130. And you can see that since July this year in particular, crude oil price started to decline and now hovering around $80 or $19 in terms of WTI. It's still high, but why its oil price became low? It's because of the concern of the global economy. This table illustrates that the IMF World Economic Outlook published in July this year. You can see that the 2022, the global GDP economic growth is projected at 3.2%. You may think that the 3.22% is not so bad, but early this year, January this year, the same IMF projected the world GDP growth for this year should be 4.4%. In the past 6 months, the world economic situation deteriorated, and IMF made a significant downward revision on world economy. Of course, US economy, European economy, Chinese economy, Japanese economy, Asian economy, all was under the significant downward revision. Why? Because of the higher oil price and because of the interest rate hike, which I'll come back later. And what was the response made by the major producers? Simply OPEC Plus producing country, to which I think Malaysia played a role as well, continued to manage the supply to meet the demand and to manage the level of oil inventory. And even United States, Japan, Europe continued to ask OPEC Plus group headed by Saudi Arabia to give us an additional supply growth. Their attitude was not so favorable from the viewpoint of consumer. And finally, this June, OPEC Plus group decided to do as an additional production growth for July supply, August supply, and September supply. Probably this is due to that various geopolitical issue, including the US Mr. Biden visit to Saudi Arabia to meet Crown Prince Mohammed to ask for the additional supply. So finally, that MBS, Crown Prince, decided to go on that additional production growth for September by 100,000 barrels per day, which is not so big. But under the strong pressure of lower oil prices since July, OPEC Plus group decided again to reduce supply by 100, same amount, which is again the geopolitical and economic consideration. So during this period, my point is that OPEC Plus group, Saudi Arabia and Russia continue to play a very important role to manage supply and to keep oil price high level, at least over $80. I mentioned here that oil price increase was very important, but this chart then illustrates the gas price is extremely expensive nowadays. Green line shows that European Brent price, and red line shows that European gas hub trading price, TTF prices. In March this year, when crude oil price hits a record of $130, which is high, but on the same day, European gas prices hit $400 in crude oil equivalent. It's extremely high. And after summer this year, when Russia decided to reduce supply to Europe for its pipeline gas, the gas price started to pick up again, and the record level of over $600 in crude oil equivalent was recorded in some time earlier. Why this happened? The answer is very simple. Gas market shortage is more and more serious in comparison to that of oil. And in other words, there is no additional supply source for gas. If Russian gas was reduced in a significant manner, there's no one to replace Russian gas. In case of oil, if Russian oil supply was reduced, actually Saudi Arabia and the UAE and some OPEC Plus member can increase supply very smoothly to replace loss in Russian supply. Again, the loss of surplus capacity in case of gas, in case of LNG, liquefied natural gas, is a very, very important issue. This has an implication for energy security again. And to combat with a very difficult gas and LNG situation, everybody in this industry is eyeing at the growth in US LNG. This chart illustrates the monthly US LNG export volume since 2016, and you can see that there is strong growth pattern up to this year, and this year US LNG yearly volume will exceed 90 million tons, and I do believe next year United States will become the world's largest LNG exporter, surpassing Qatar, surpassing Australia. And one important element of US LNG growth is flexibility. The traditional LNG export, including export from your country, Malaysia, is based on long-term contract and rather rigid supply form. But US LNG is a very different animal. It's a very flexible. That when European gas market became very tight, it is US LNG to go to that market to help ease the situation. So I think that US LNG continued to be a very important source of energy security and energy flexibility in the coming years. And the next year and the next 3 years, I think that the US LNG supply continued to grow because of the current crisis and because of the need of LNG to help combat the gas market shortage. But again, at what pace and what speed US LNG can grow depend on many factors, but the major factor is a level of final investment decision. That the investor need to decide at what time the money should be put in that project. And another complication comes from that long-term decarbonization. Gas is being reviewed as a transition energy, which is fine, but for the year 2040 and beyond, what the future of gas is still unknown and uncertain. So under the circumstance, the long-term commitment in investment became rather difficult. How to solve this question, again, is a very important issue of security of supply or energy security in the area of gas and LNG. And this slide shows that my personal views on the outlook for short-term outlook for oil and gas market, depending on the circumstance of Russian gas interruption or disruption. The first scenario is based on the assumption that geopolitical risk remain same at this level, but without major supply disruption in oil and gas. So under the circumstance, my view is that oil price is likely to fluctuate in the center level of $100 plus minus $20. When the economic concern is a major issue, probably the minus 20. But the supply problem became a shortage, center stage, it will become a plus $20. And in this scenario, European gas price may hover at around $30, $50 per million BTU, which is almost $200 in crude oil equivalent, so still it's high. The second scenario is a major supply disruption scenario, and I think that the result is really serious. Both on oil and gas, we will see the record high prices level, and in particular, gas case in the gas market, the extremely high gas price is likely to continue, not only for this year, but next year and beyond. Oil prices will see the historic high in this scenario, but as I mentioned, in the case of oil market, we have the surplus production capacity in Saudi Arabia and UAE, and in consuming country, we have the oil inventory or oil stockpile. Probably International Energy Agency, IEA, will lead that the consuming countries coordinated stock drawdown. So under the circumstance, we will see a very high prices, but high price will be eased and remain that the very volatile situation continue. The third scenario is most hope. I do hope to see this third scenario, which is a ceasefire and a gradual stabilization of Ukraine crisis scenario. But this scenario also goes to the still high level of crude oil, $70, $80, and the gas price $20, $30. Because even if the military operation is stopped, there is no issue of easing energy supply and demand. In other words, risk premium caused by the crisis will be removed, but still we will continue to see the very tight market situation. Another element is the coal issues. Coal price is very important, in particular in Asian countries, including Malaysia and even Japan as well. This is because that the coal is a very dominantly important power generation source in many countries in Asia, which is a little bit different situation in particular in Europe. As I mentioned, that the coal prices during the period of corona pandemic, it saw that the extremely low prices below $50 per ton. But you can see 2021, it continued to rise. And during the Ukraine crisis, it hit record high level of over $400 per ton. So from the bottom recorded in the COVID period, the coal price in the world, spot price, became almost 10 times high. Both it will affect our economy and our cost of power generation, and in some cases, that the need for the energy subsidies and high enormous burden for the subsidies. That the coal price increase became a very important phenomenon, in particular in Asian countries, and I think that this situation may continue. Of course, the current extremely high $400 price may not continue, but my view is that at least for next year, we will see that over $300 coal price may be likely. And this slide summarizes the feature of the Ukraine crisis in the impact on the energy market. I would like to point out that this crisis is a combination of military invasion and economic sanctions. As you know very well, after the invasion, Western countries, US, Europe, Japan, embarked on the very serious economic sanction, including energy sector sanction on Russia. And under the circumstance, there was emerged that the serious concern over the Russian energy export availability by three ways. First one is the impact on Western sanction itself hinder the Russian export. The second one is a military operation and war, ongoing war, became the factor to disrupt the energy infrastructure and energy export. And the third one, which is now happening, is Russia itself is reducing supply. In any case, if this disruption became very substantial, oil market, gas LNG market, coal market, and power market as well will be influenced very, very seriously. And under the circumstance, extremely serious economic and social impact will be felt, in particular in Europe. That's why European nations became extremely serious to embark on energy security policy, which I'll come back later. But again, we need to ask why this happened. This is based on the fact of importance of Russian energy in the world. And you can see from the first bullet point, Russian energy account major share in global oil resource, gas resource, oil production, gas production, but most importantly, shown in red character, oil export, Russian oil export is world number one. And Russian gas export, which account for almost 1/4 of global gas export, of course, number one. And even coal export is number 3 after Australia and Indonesia. So all in all, Russia is the largest fossil fuel exporter in the world. And furthermore, Russian export and Russian energy is under the very strong national strategy headed by the top leader of Russia. Mr. Putin regards that energy is a strategic good for Russia, and energy is used to maximize the national interest of Russia, and energy industry and energy operation is under the strong influence of the leaders. And also, Russian energy is extremely important in the world, but in particular important in European market. On the left-hand side of the slide, you can find that the European dependence on Russian energy source. On right-hand side, on the contrary, dependence on Europe, Russian dependence on European market. You can find from the viewpoint of Europe, Russia is the #1 exporter to Europe for oil, gas, and coal. In particular, that the gas dependence is almost half. It's extremely important gas export source. But at the same time, from the Russian point of view, Europe is a major outlet of their export. Again, we can say that Russia and Europe is in the interdependent situation. Why it happened? I think there are two reasons. First, the economic competitiveness. In particular, from European viewpoint, Russian energy source, oil, gas, coal, is economically most competitive against other sources. And second point is European strategic decision made at first during the early 1980s. Early 1980s, during the Soviet period, West Germany decided to go on the huge scale from former Soviet Union. At that time, President Reagan was opposed to that idea, saying that it is very risky. If the Europe is going to depend on Soviet Union, it will create a national threat. But at that time, the leader in West Germany said the interdependent situation became the source of stability. And this situation continued to play out, even the so-called Nord Stream 2 pipeline. When the President Trump at that time criticized the European attitude to going to depend on Russian gas source by constructing Nord Stream 2, many leaders in Europe said interdependence became a source of stability. But now the situation became completely opposite. And another complication comes from the difference in dependence on Russian gas supply in major countries. You can find very easily Germany and Italy, major continental European country, heavily dependent on Russian gas, oil, coal, while UK is not so dependent, and United States and Canada, major G7 country, almost zero dependence on Russian source. That's why they are more easy stance to go on the economic sanction and energy sanction. How about Japan? Japan's dependence on Russia is not so high as compared to Germany and Italy, you can find. But next slide shows the different view. Japanese situation is characterized by the extremely low self-sufficiency. Germany and Italy also is characterized by the low energy self-sufficiency, which creates the vulnerability of energy security. Again, United States and Canada is a net exporter of energy. So these difference in energy self-sufficiency and dependence on Russian energy became a very difficult condition to coordinate and to cooperate that strategy against Russia. And here, I just want to mention about the similarity of the ongoing current crisis and the past most serious energy crisis shown in the early 1970s, first oil crisis. There are several important similarity and commonality. First, both crises saw that the global energy price increased before the crisis happened. As I mentioned, you may remember that the current crisis, since the second half of last year, we saw the higher energy prices. What about the oil crisis in 1970? Early 1970s, we started to saw that the rising global oil prices. And second commonality is that both crises featured by the high level of dependence on specific source. Of course, the oil crisis in the 70s was characterized by the high dependence on Middle East oil. Now, high Russian dependence became the importance. The third point is a fact and trigger of the crisis, the combination of the two issues, the war and sanction and embargo. We mentioned about the current crisis. What about the oil crisis in 70s? You may remember that the first oil crisis was triggered by Yom Kippur war between the Israel and Arab nations. And after that, Arab oil producers started to embark on the Arab oil embargo, which caused a significant instability in global energy market. So under the circumstance, there are two very important commonality between the current crisis and the 70 crisis. What is that? That's a very serious concern over the physical shortage of energy. I talked about a lot about the higher energy price and the cost, but in case of energy security concern or energy stability, physical shortage is the most serious problem. If and when people and policy planners became serious about physical shortage, it will create a big implication for the society and for the economy. And actually, this is now happening now in Europe. In Europe, many people are seriously considering and concerning about the winter gas and power shortage. That's why they are really struggling for the energy security policy for their own. But at the same time, energy price hike is of course not negligible. Why? That higher price will have a significant negative implication on consumers, on businesses, companies. For consumers, higher energy prices means the reduced disposable income. It's like a tax. For companies, higher energy prices means a higher cost of their business, which will deteriorate their financial situation and deteriorate the job situation, and there are lots of ripple effect. For the macroeconomy, particularly for the importing countries, it means that the outflow of national income, and in many developing countries where the significant portion of energy subsidies exist, it will lead to the serious situation of the government budget. And furthermore, the current energy crisis should be featured by the accompanied energy-related inflation. In the past decade, the global economy is characterized by the deflation. The government was continued to fight against the deflation. But in many countries, we are struggling with a very unprecedented level of inflation. In particular, United States and Europe is imminent. That's why that government is started to seriously embark on the interest rate hike, which will have a very significant negative implication on the economy. And you may also remember, during the 1980s, the global economy continued to shrink for 3-4 years. Why was happening? It was a combination of higher oil price, higher inflation, and interest rate hike. But a similar situation is happening now in today. So under the circumstance, government need to tackle on the energy security issues in serious mode. And in particular, that the European situation is most serious. And as we talked, the current crisis is based on the concern over the Russian energy export. The energy security policy nowadays, the first pillar is to reduce the dependence on Russian energy. How we can do that? There are two ways. One is to reduce dependence on fossil fuel itself. In other words, to improve the energy mix policy, to promote RE, to promote energy efficiency, and to promote nuclear power. So energy mix policy is directly related to the reduction in Russian energy dependence. This is fine, but the problem for this policy is that it takes time. You cannot solve the situation by RE today. And during this period, we continue to depend on fossil fuel. That's why the second approach is we need to find an alternative supply of oil and gas and coal. In other words, we need to find that, say, Saudi Arabia oil, UAE oil, or US LNG, Qatar LNG, or Colombian coal, any part, non-Russian fossil fuel is needed. And second pillar is the emergency preparedness. This should be based on the domestic policy as well, but at the same time, in time of emergency, international cooperation will be the key. In case of oil, in case of gas, in case of LNG, without international cooperation, market disruption became more and more serious. That will damage us. And third pillar, and in my view, it is very, very important, as Dato pointed out at the first opening speech, that the necessary investment in all energy sector, including fossil fuel, is imminent. Without necessary sufficient investment, we cannot solve that current very extremely tight situation. And that will lead to the big implication on decarbonization policy as well. And the fourth pillar is a revisit of stable baseload power supply sources. So under the circumstances, many countries in the world, including Europe and Japan and the United States, started to shed new light on the importance of nuclear power. Of course, nuclear power continues to be politically and socially sensitive, but Ukraine crisis and the new global energy landscape gives a new chance to look at the nuclear power from a new, different viewpoint. And here I would like to draw your attention about that European serious effort to tackle on Russian energy sources. Probably you may have that Repower EU, very ambitious initiative of EU to reduce Russian dependence at least by the year 2030. Already, European Union countries in EU decided to go on the ban of oil import from Russia, coal import from Russia, but gas is very difficult. That's why the Repower EU plan is to reduce Russian gas dependence, at least by the year 2030, but hopefully earlier, by introducing, by promoting the RE and EE, hydrogen, and some country by nuclear power. And also, European nation is dashing to secure that additional gas, in particular for United States. You may be surprised to see how big volume of US LNG is now flowing into Europe. It is fine, but because of this change in the global gas flow, I think that now it is very difficult for many Asian consumers to find out that additional gas, LNG from United States. So I think that the things became very complicated, in particular towards this winter, if the winter market situation became tight. As shown here in the last sentence, there may become a kind of a battle over LNG in the zero-sum game context, with the European country and gas buyers in Asia. And this is because of the perceived serious concern over this winter energy shortage. It is true concern. Many European countries, European nations are facing with potential shortage of energy during the very severe winter time. Of course, no one knows what will happen, in particular the gas supply from Russia. Since June this year, Russian major pipeline gas started to be reduced, in some cases completely halt. Nowadays, as far as I know, probably that the Russian gas supply stayed at about 20% of normal level. If this situation continued over the winter, some countries may face a shortage. And this shortage situation may lead to a serious recession in Europe. And recession, energy shortage, and extreme energy high prices may become a big political and social problem in Europe. So we have to closely watch what is going to happen in Europe for this winter. And of course, the current ongoing crisis in Ukraine became the major top agenda in the world now. But at the same time, we need to understand European situation, US situation, Russian situation became important, but global gravity center of energy market is shifting to Asia. And higher energy prices and higher energy costs became a serious problem for many Asian countries. Of course, as I mentioned, that the European nation may become a serious negative impact from this current crisis. But in my view, the real kind of victim for the ongoing crisis may become the low-income Asian consuming country. At the same time, in terms of the geopolitics, we have to pay attention to the continued US-China conflict. It's a more structural problem, and under the circumstances, the game between big players, United States, Russia, Middle East, China, EU, Japan, this game among big players became the source of instability. And externalities such as energy security and of course decarbonization effort going to be a very important source to impact on energy market stability and global energy governance for the next decades to come. Another dimension of geopolitics of energy, or the importance attached to the geopolitics, is potentially that this pathway is a deviation from the cost minimum world or pursuit of optimum efficiency. Why this happened? The global economy under the free trade or that it is based on the concept of cost minimization or the pursuit of efficiency, but under the geopolitics or the geopolitical world, the world is going to be deviate from that cost minimum pathway. That will lead to the lower GDP, and that will be lead to the different pattern of energy choice, which will emphasize on the domestic energy sources available and affordable. So this is also affecting to the issues of carbon neutrality. As I mentioned, we should remember that year 2020 as the start of the wave of carbon neutrality effort towards the middle of this century. Over 150 countries already announced its own version of carbon neutrality. Some countries are very specific, some countries is still uncertain, but anyway, people and the government in particular are very serious about the pursuit of carbon neutrality. It is really challenging, but under the impact of the Ukraine crisis, what is going to happen on the carbon neutrality initiative is another important question. Unfortunately, there's no one in the world to have the clear answer to this. But my personal view is that before the crisis happened, every debate in energy is dominated by only carbon neutrality. But we now have the two axes. One is carbon neutrality, of course, in the long run, but energy security and secure, stable, affordable energy prices became another very important axis as a discussion point of government. And another important issue is that pursuit of carbon neutrality became the source of very complicated problem of energy security itself. Some people argue that in the carbon neutrality world, the traditional energy security concern will be gone because in carbon neutrality world, every country, depending on circumstance, but anyway, characterized by high share of renewable energy. Renewable energy is a domestic source of energy supply, and that will be good for the energy security of supply. But during the voyage to carbon neutrality, it is very likely to depend on fossil fuel for decades. So under the circumstance, the security of fossil fuel supply continues to be the top agenda as indicated by the ongoing crisis. But more importantly, for pursuit of carbon neutrality, the key element is promotion of electrification, the usage of RE, which lead to the heavy dependence on the critical minerals. And critical mineral security of supply became another important agenda. And in terms of electrification, promotion of electrification, which means that the electricity is going to be more and more important in any country, security of power supply became an issue. And security of electricity supply will have a numbers of emerging concern or problem, starting from the rising share of VRE and cybersecurity, and side effect of market liberalization. So even if we continue to pursue seriously on the carbon neutrality journey, I think that the energy security issue continue to be there. If we believe energy security concern will be removed in the carbon neutrality world, I would say this is a too much optimistic view. Under circumstance, I just want to mention about Japan's position now. Japan continued to make a serious effort to pursue carbon neutrality in the year 2030. And in the middle of that pathway, we have set a specific energy mix target in the year 2030. I'll come back on later, the next slide. But now, energy security for Japan, which heavily dependent on the imported energy, became a real priority for us. And in particular, this is caused by, of course, the ongoing Ukraine crisis. But at the same time, we are experiencing the serious electricity supply demand tightening. This spring, as well as this summer, we had a very serious potential shortage of power. Why it happened? It's related to the issue of market liberalization. Our surplus power supply capacity was seriously reduced. And during the period of low operation of RE, we continue to see the very serious situation is likely to happen again. And many people in Japan is paying serious attention to this winter problem. This winter, we may see the very serious potential electricity shortage. So under the circumstance, we are now paying a new attention to address energy security and climate change issues, and to pursue this set 2030 energy mix target. There are lots of targets, energy efficiency target, RE target, and hydrogen target, and so many, and all are very challenging targets. But I would like to say that one of the key issues now in Japan is a revisit of the importance of nuclear power again. Nuclear power is now being shed a new light, as I mentioned, in Europe. France and UK is now building a new one. But in case of Japan, we are paying a great attention to the restart of nuclear power. Restart means that we should utilize the existing capacity with enhanced safety. And if we successfully restart numbers of nuclear power, we will effectively and efficiently address energy security and CO2 emission reduction and power cost reduction. Again, it is still sensitive, politically, socially difficult, but the Japanese government is now became very serious after the Fukushima nuclear accident in about 11 years ago. And all in all, I think there are the numbers of serious and important implications to Malaysia, I think. Firstly, even Malaysia is exporting energy commodity like LNG, but I think the bottom line of energy policy should be energy security. To provide energy stably and affordably to your citizen and economy, business is a kind of a paramount. And also, you have to be very careful about what is going to happen about the Ukraine crisis and under the economic condition. I may say there's a potential threat to see that the serious downward revision of GDP growth in the United States, in Asia, in Japan, in Europe, that will have an implication on Malaysian economy. I don't know what will happen in the global economy. Without crystal ball, no one knows. But it is possible we can see the very serious economic situation in the world. And third one is a geopolitical tension. Even if we can see some stabilization of Ukraine crisis, we will continue to see that the very tense geopolitical situation in the world. Namely, we will see the two conflicting power. One is so-called Western power, led by US and Europe, and the other is comprised of China, Russian strategic partnership. Probably the rest of the world will be between these two powers, and the strategic consideration on this geopolitical tension became a very important issue for Malaysia for the years to come. I think it's not a short-term phenomenon. It's a long-term phenomenon, I think. And also, based on your resource endowment and based on your technological capability and industry structure, I think it is important to reconsider the best way to secure stable supply and also to go on your own decarbonization pathway in a pragmatic way. Of course, I know that Malaysia already announced that carbon neutrality in the year 2050. I think it is serious, but at the same time, how to achieve carbon neutrality? We may find the various pathways. It's not only the pathway, we have a pathway. So we need to reconsider what should be the pathway that we should pursue. And finally, I think it's the most important issue is to protect and maximize Malaysian own national interest with international cooperation. Of course, your country's effort is most essential, but in the world that we need to have the cooperation in the area of economy, in the area of politics, in the area of geopolitics and technology. So I'll stop here and thank you very much for your listening.
Thank you, Yambaru's Professor Dr. Ken Koyama. Now we have come to the question and ask session. I would like to invite the questions from the floor and the virtual participants. If there is any question, please.
Okay, very good morning, Prof. Ken and everyone. Okay, I have one question regarding the gas market liberalization. Okay, so as we know that recently, due to the gas market reform or liberalization of Malaysia, is looking towards to establish their gas market hub. Okay, as we know that the landscape of oil and gas Malaysia already matured, and we have a very strong oil and gas infra and facilities in terms of PGU pipelines, RGT, and the LNG transmission pipelines. Okay, my question is, in terms of your opinion regarding the aspiration or potential to having Malaysia gas hub into a center for gas trade in the Asia Pacific by facilitating the creation of natural gas exchange in the country. So is it the Ukraine crisis could be the reason to realizing this Asia gas hub or impede the objective of having gas hub in Asia Pacific? So is it having a gas hub is a good potential we have to look at now? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nora, for your question. I think that, of course, every country, including Malaysia, have the opportunity to set up or establish their own gas hub, which became a kind of a regional benchmarking hub. And I think that government and industry need to work together to have the fluent trading and to have the flexible trading to secure the business opportunity. But firstly, if we see that the market creation is the start point of the market creation is availability of flexible trading. And in this context, that the current situation is not so favorable. And before, not only favorable for Malaysia, but also for all the player who is interested in creating hub or creating a trading platform. This is because we need to find a participant to that trading. But when the gas price is extremely high, I think it's rather difficult to find out who is willing to sell and who is willing to buy these extremely high gas prices. In the history of the gas market development, we tend to see that the lower price environment became more favorable, where many market participants became very much interested in go on that as a new entrant and to find out many opportunities. But I think that the current situation in this sense is not at all that good for anybody. So, but at the same time, I will say that the current extremely high market situation is likely to remain, I would say, this year, next year, maybe, probably, and next year beyond. But in the mid and long term, I think that things can be normalized. And during this period, you should continue to work with the market stakeholder to try to prepare that suitable market condition. And when the market became stabilized, you can go on that effort to see that the sound market development. And under the current situation for any market players, including Japan or Korea or Singapore or China, I think it's quite hard. And probably my personal concern is that as far as the current volatile and the difficult stage continue, it will hinder the growth of gas market itself. I hope that I can answer their question.
Good morning, Prof. My question is,
what is the implication of existing RE capacity in Europe in regards to this crisis? Basically, has it reduced the severity of energy security or energy disruption from Russia, or has it increased the severity of the energy disruption from Russia? Thank you.
So you asked me about the existing RE capacity.
Yeah, what is the implication? Thanks.
Very much for your question. Of course, that the existing RE capacity can produce that power generation, for example, that will lead to that alternative to Russian oil, gas, and coal. But as I mentioned, it depends on that, in particular for the case of VRE, it depends on the natural condition. And if the weather condition became unfavorable, and we cannot depend on wind power or solar PV, it will lead to that additional appetite for other sources of energy, including fossil fuel. In that case, I think it will become the source of instability again. So basically, using the existing RE capacity is good to reduce the dependency on fossil fuel and in particular Russian fossil fuel. But just in case of unfavorable weather condition for VRE happened, it will become a kind of risk factor. And having said that, European Union is really embarking on increasing that RE capacity from now on. Even before the Ukraine crisis, probably you may have that Fit for 55 package, which is an initiative to meet that EU goal to reduce GHG emission by 55% in the year 2030. And in this plan, RE capacity is projected to increase very, very rapidly, significantly. In view of that, increased RE will reduce GHG emission in European countries. And this plan will be accelerated by the Repower EU, which I mentioned earlier. So I think that towards the year 2030, at least EU will be making a serious investment on that RE so that they can successfully contribute to the reduction on Russian energy dependence.
Hi, Dr. and welcome back to Malaysia. My question is simple. As you said that fossil fuels is still the focal point of energy security, right? But at the same time, the wave of carbon neutral targets from countries and so on makes it more complex. And it's quite impossible actually for some nations to achieve the target that we set. For example, in Malaysia, our target is 40% renewable energy by 2035, but right now we're already at 52%, so it's very impossible to achieve that target. So in a way, would you say that this target, the Paris Agreement, net zero, and carbon neutrality is a threat to energy security, or in a way that is just a greenwashing statement made by nations? And also, what is your suggestion for Malaysia actually to move forward for both energy security and also carbon neutrality sustainably? That's my question.
Thank you very much. I think that your second question relates to the study that we mean that I myself and my friend in IPRI is trying to address on the issue of fuel energy best mix or fuel security mix. And I think that it is important to enhance energy security at the same time to addressing the carbon neutrality goal. And you are right that 2050 carbon neutrality achievement is really challenging for any country. It's not only for Malaysia, but it's also very challenging for Japan. I think that the United States and EU even. So I think that probably we should make our best effort to reach to the carbon neutrality. But I would say that at this moment, probably no one can be sure that whether we can reach the carbon neutrality in the year 2050. But I think that prescription for carbon neutrality is rather simple. There are the two simple prescriptions. One is to maximize the pace of electrification with the creation of zero emission power system, either RE or nuclear power or fossil fuel power with CCS or fossil fuel power generation using the CO2-free fuel, like CO2-free hydrogen or CO2-free ammonia. I think that this kind of should be pursued in case of the country where the existing coal-fired power plant play a significant role. For example, people in Europe typically tend to argue that the dependence on coal-fired power plant is bad because of the heavy emission of CO2. So why don't you stop all the power plant and replace it by RE? It's very simple. But I think in reality, it's not feasible. I think that in particular for many Asian countries, you will have a rather young fleet of coal-fired power generation. In Europe, many countries decided to phase out coal power generation. But if we look at the situation, their coal-fired power plant is very old and inefficient. It was constructed about 40 years ago, 30 years ago. But in Asian countries, there are many young coal-fired power generation, which will last for next 30 years, 40 years. And how we can reduce the CO2 emission from these coal-power plants? I think one of the answers is co-firing with clean fuel, such as CO2-free ammonia or CO2-free hydrogen. And this kind of gradual, step-by-step pragmatic approach will be the possible idea that you may consider. As I mentioned, in my view is that pursuit of carbon neutrality is essential, but probably realization of carbon neutrality can be made by different approach based on the different condition of the countries. So I think that enhancing energy security and carbon neutrality should be simultaneously pursued based on your country and industry and technological condition. I said this is a kind of pragmatic and inclusive approach. I think that this is a very important concept. The only one pathway is too narrow. We'll have a various options to be pursued. Okay.
Hi, good morning, Professor. My name is Julia. I'm from the Energy Commission. I'm the legal director from EC. Thank you for the very enlightening session that we just had. I'm coming from the perspective of the policy design of a particular country, because we hear about the importance of energy security and how we need to decarbonize the environment and all. But I think we're living in a very, very tough environment with unprecedented socio-political challenges. Now, from the policymakers' perspective, what would be the best policy design, in your opinion, that could support all these initiatives going towards energy security and carbon neutrality globally? Because I think it's very interesting where you mentioned that Japan increased the GHG reduction from I think 26%. It has been increased up to 46%, right? So coming from the regulator's perspective, I'm just wondering if there are things that we have not considered at this point. What we could do better, because you rightly pointed out that we need to learn from what's happening around us. So from the EC perspective, any additional suggestions that you can share with us how we can move faster, in line, and more proactive in handling this crisis? Thank you.
Thank you very much for your question. I think it's a very fundamentally important question. And my short answer is strengthening the combination of wisdom in your country. For example, in case of Japan, the energy policy making is responsible for METI. METI is the government body to make long-term energy planning. And under the METI, there are many divisions who is handling on oil issues, gas issues, coal issues, nuclear issues, RE issues, E issues, climate change issues. And all the government agencies is coordinated to create a kind of, how can I say, advisory council to discuss these issues. And to support this discussion and the planning of this advisory council, we should try to collect the national wisdom through the industry expert executives' views, and also the analytical insight from the research institute and academia. That a strong combination of the national wisdom is necessary. And in particular, after making these policy planning, we need to disseminate that our strategy to our citizen, Japanese citizen. This is also very important. For example, in particular, the issue related to nuclear power, we need to get good understanding of Japanese people and Japanese citizens. And to do that, we should also work together with, for example, the media people. So it's a combination of national strength and national wisdom to deal with this kind of very complicated and difficult energy and climate challenge. And of course, I understand in case of Malaysia, you also have the combination of this national wisdom. My point is that based on the current situation, difficult situation, you need to reconsider how to enhance the combination of various power, various insight held in your country, and effectively this strategy or planning should be disseminated and to help get a better understanding of the policy. In some cases, that energy policies planning may lead to, I would say, not the popular policy, but even if this not popular policy, this should be well received or well understood by the nations. So I think that not only making planning and strategy, but also for implementation or implementing policy, it's very important to get a good understanding and a good, I would say, improve the energy literacy issues. So academia and research think tank and mass media need to play that role. Again, that the combination will be the key. I hope that I can answer the question. Thank you very much.
Hello, Prof. I'm Amalia from IPRI. I'm reading this question from the virtual participants. This question is very simple. In terms of energy exports, how would this global energy crisis affect Malaysia? In terms of energy export, how would this global energy crisis affect Malaysia?
Your question is how the current crisis affect on the energy export of Malaysia, right? Okay. I think that in particular that the LNG export is still very important economic power for Malaysia, and under the circumstance that the oil price increase and the gas spot price increase, that the market condition became tight, I think that the position of Malaysia LNG export is enhanced. So I think that it is contributing to the Malaysian economy very well. And in short and medium term, I think that this is likely to continue. And the Malaysian LNG export will not only benefit to the Malaysian economy, but also it will benefit to the stabilization of the global LNG and gas market. So in this sense, it will enhance the visibility of Malaysian LNG export into the world, I think. And in the long run, I think that the Malaysian LNG or gas sector need to rethink about its strategy. Probably in the long run, the outlet for LNG will focus on the traditional importer like Japan to the emerging Asian country. And also you need to think about that long-term pathway together with the decarbonization pathway. So how that the Malaysian gas sector is addressing this very complicated challenge is a kind of long-term challenge for your industry after the Ukraine crisis. But clearly that the current crisis gives a great opportunity for Malaysian LNG industry.
Thank you, Prof, for your enlightening lecture. My name is Mohammed Al-Umari, postdoctoral researcher from ICE Institute. My question, while we are talking about energy security, can we relate that somehow to the energy cyber security nowadays, especially when now we are talking about renewable energy, which is highly affected by a lot of kind of new attacks against renewable energy. Previously, maybe nuclear plant has been affected in Iran. Another one, maybe in Ukraine also, there was one attack. Power grids are under attack. So how do you relate the current energy security to that cybersecurity? Does it have, I mean, some effect, major effect, or just side effect? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your very important question. I briefly touched upon that issue related to cybersecurity in my presentation. In the context that for the next 2, 3, 4 decades, there is a common understanding that electricity will be the center stage of global energy. Electrification will be promoted in every country where that security of electricity became a really important issues. And for the security of electricity supply, cybersecurity or cyber attack concern will become a source of major risk factor, in my views. So far, globally, the cyber security became not a large-scale shock, like an ongoing Ukraine crisis or say 1970 oil crisis. But potentially, I think that as far as the electricity became very important in any country, that cybersecurity may disrupt that energy system in a great matter. And as you pointed out, even that the local system, it will become a very important source of disruption. And I think that global energy stakeholder and policy planner already noted these potential risk issues. And for example, International Energy Agency, IEA, already recognized that electricity security supply became important issue, and under the circumstance, cybersecurity need to be tackled with in a coordinated manner. So I think that study and research should be made in a serious manner. What will be the serious impact and how to address the concern created by the cybersecurity. I think that this is a very important area of study and research in the future. And I totally agree with your point that the issue, importance of cybersecurity. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Yang Berusaha Professor Dr. Ken Koyama and all the participants from the floor and also the virtual Microsoft Teams. And now we have come to the end of the question and answer sessions. We will officially wrap up the question and answer session.